show them a very complicated level, and if it's only using one key, one gate, they could probably just look at the level and figure out in their head how to do it. There's no surprise. The other thing I was talking about is that some objects are immune to your ability to reverse time. That also is a little bit more strange, but once you get used to it, it's pretty easy to understand, especially if you think about objects that just travel in straight lines. It's very easy. But what happens when you combine these two things is you get things that the player cannot predict very easily, because you're now in a space where the phenomena are about complex things, like the way that in complexity theory two things combine and generate a very unpredictable pattern. And another way to surprise is to take your low-level ideas and build higher-level ideas with them that go beyond what the player would have thought of. And so, my example of that is going to be really. So, what I'm about to show is like a more sadistic version of what Danielle showed earlier today. Here, this thing on the right is a valuable collectible that I want to get. And here's my guy on the left. And all that stands between me and that is this tiny little block, right? But the problem is my character cannot jump. All he can do is flip gravity. And so he's going to start this puzzle by flinging himself in the air in the hope that there's something solid up there. And in the case of this level, he will find that there isn't. There's a horrible, horrible death trap 7 screens long and a platform you can only stand on for a tenth of a second. And it's very hard to get through, right? And it's funny, right? And it's even funnier if you play the game, you know that it's funny because it's true. As soon as you start playing this, you understand all of these consequences, right? Let's see, he'll get it eventually if you let him play long. I'm not able to do this one. I stole somebody's YouTube video for this. I did the other one. And part of the reason this is funny is because it's natural, I think. Because it doesn't try too hard. There's not some dialogue saying, oh my God. There's not some dialogue saying, oh my God, how am I going to get the collectibles? There's a block in the way. You know there's a block in the way, right? We have to stop this. The pain will continue. You know there's a block in the way because your experience as a player communicates everything there that you need. Another thing we value is orthogonality, which is a math word, which just says that if you add something to your game, you want to make sure it's not redundant with other things in your game, right? And what this results in is that you have a small number of rules or postulates that expand over the maximum amount of space. And one example that we like for orthogonality is this arcade shooter called EVA. I guess many of you are familiar with it. This game is very interesting. It's a shmup, right? A shooter game where there's lots of bullets on the screen. And there's a long tradition of these games. And traditionally, as the ship in this game, you have two weapons at your disposal: a main gun that fires very fast, and a bomb that does a lot more damage and also clears the screen of bullets, right? And as the design of these games evolved, it became clear that, especially to players, that the secondary ability of your bomb, that it actually clears the screen of bullets, is in many cases a lot more valuable than just damaging the enemy some, right? Because that only buys you a couple of seconds, whereas you only have a few lives. If you get rid of the bombs and you would have died, or if you get rid of the bullets and you would have died, it's very valuable. And what Ikaruga does is it gets rid of the smart bomb completely and says, instead of that, we're going to have you switch colors. You can switch between red and blue, and when you're red, red bullets don't hurt you. In fact, they're energy. You can pick them up, right? And blue bullets hurt you. And then if you switch colors, the opposite becomes true. And that also determines what enemies you can damage more powerfully or less powerfully, right? And so it took something that had a redundancy, right? That your bomb does damage and your main weapon does damage. And by taking away the bomb and giving you color switching, now you have color switching which doesn't do any damage but can combine with your main weapon to do different things in different circumstances. And that suddenly becomes more interesting and exciting. So I didn't go through all of these, but here's the list again. So presume now that in the course of designing a game, you've used all these ideas, you've started with a very vague starting point, and then you've explored and found rich game mechanics and made them very strong. How do you then do the concrete work of level design? How do you give this stuff to the player in the best way? And since Mark and I are both doing puzzle games, we figured the way to ask this very specifically is the way that we get asked all the time. How do you make good puzzles, right? What makes a good puzzle and what makes a bad puzzle? And what I always tell people is, first of all, you don't try to make them hard. Because that's the tradition of games, is making things hard. Especially of puzzle games, we have a picture in our head that a puzzle game is about, ha ha ha, this is too tricky for you, are you smart enough? But that's actually not necessarily that interesting, because it's easy to make a really hard puzzle, right? It's not easy to make an interesting puzzle. But then I claim you don't even try to design good puzzles by trying to make good puzzles. Because if you try to make a good puzzle, you're drawing only on the things that you already know. You're making puzzles about things that are well within your understanding. And if they're within your understanding, they're within a lot of people's understanding. And so there's going to be a lot of people for which you're not showing them anything new. So what I say is, if you use this method that I'm talking about, where you explore, you look for things that are true, and then the puzzle itself is an illustration of those things. That's all that it needs to be. And when it is that, the resulting puzzle is going to be interesting. And I'll talk about why in a few slides at the very end. So I would say, in the method I'm talking about here, the point of having a puzzle is to show some truth to the player. So as a designer, for that puzzle to be good, you first of all have to know what that thing is that you're trying to communicate. And that sounds very straightforward, but actually most game designers most of the time don't know the point of what they're doing, really. So if you know that, you're doing better than 99% of game designers. Once you at least have a vague idea about that, then you go look at your level design or your puzzle design or whatever, and you eliminate everything that does not focus on that thing that is the point, right? When I was designing Brave, at first I had a lot of monsters in it, because it was a puzzle platformer and I needed to have some platforming action. But I found that as I deleted the extra monsters and got rid of the level geometry and got rid of things in the background art that were eye-catching but that had nothing to do with the actual gameplay, the more I did that, the simpler and the more beautiful the game became, because it knew what it was about. Now, once you've done this, once you know what you're doing, how do you make it even better than that? You can make an individual puzzle that's good, but then by framing it in a game along with a series of other puzzles, as part of a sequence or of a superstructure, you can create an evolving narrative or an ongoing set of ideas that the player can follow, and that's very interesting. And this happens naturally in games often when you're teaching things to the player, right? You start out with something very simple and very basic, and then you do a slightly more involved version and a more involved. But if you're only thinking, I want to teach this mechanic to the player, then often you will end up with something very boring, right? But if you keep in mind, I want to build this higher level conversation, then you can allow yourself to stray from that linear sequence and play in the ideas, and it gets better. and you will not end up with something boring. So here's an example from the witness. Again, these are those puzzles where I'm trying to separate the different colors. And this is a teaching sequence where I have a very simple one on the left and a complicated one on the right. And non-verbally, with no instructions, people play this game, and they're able to get from the left to the right in a couple of minutes, usually. The one on the left, again, I have my starting circle, I have my end point, I have some grid lines all around here. And my goal is to trace from the beginning to the end, I know that, but I've never seen these before, I don't know what they mean. I could try this first, which is the right answer. It's one of the right answers. There are only, though, 4 different ways to trace. You could go this way, you could go that way, you could go along the bottom, or you could go around, right? There's only 4 ways to trace, and 2 of them are right. So even if you have no idea what this might mean, within a couple of tries, you're going to get the puzzle right. And once you do, you have a positive example to draw from. Then the game gives you the next one. It's much like the last one, right?